This body will take some getting used to. Hello, my name is Will, and this is Exploding Helicopter, the podcast that would like to ask you a series of control questions. The 1950s were a golden age for science fiction films. The decade gave us a whole galaxy of movies that have come to be considered classics of the genre. Films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Thing from Another World, Invaders from Mars, and The Blob. Inevitably, in the years that followed, all of these titles have come to be remade with varying levels of success. All of which is to say that the film we're looking at on this show is another attempt to reimagine a 50s sci-fi classic. It's the 2008 version of The Day the Earth Stood Still. And talking of recycling old ideas, my choice of guest today highlights what little inspiration exists at Exploding Helicopter. With me once again is my good friend Nick Rehag. How you doing, buddy?
I am fantastic. Well, how have you been?
Yep, I'm pretty good. I am pretty good, and looking forward to talking to you about these. I guess let's get the cat out of the bag. These two films, because we are, both looking at the 2008 version of The Day the Earth Stood Still. But I got you to watch the original Day the Earth Stood Still as well, which both first time watches for you. And I was interested to particularly get you to watch the original because I knew you hadn't seen it. It's considered one of the kind of classics of 50s sci-fi. It's a film that I've got a big soft spot for. So that kind of all put me in mind of, though, where are you with these kind of big beasts of 50s science fiction? Which ones of them have you seen?
I've seen a handful. Not to plug too early, but because of the Play MST for Me podcast that I do with Jason Soto, a lot of the early episodes of Mystery Science Theater, they're watching these films from the 50s. So seeing these kind of gets me inspired to then go and watch them. And I'll see things like, the giant behemoth, obviously Gojira, which Godzilla just celebrated its 70th birthday. So happy birthday, Godzilla. But just a lot of these huge creature things like Attack of the Crab Monsters or Earth versus the Spider People or Spiders, whatever it's called. Just a lot of these, just here comes this creature and it's come to destroy us all. And then there's more subtle ones where you have Creature from the Black Lagoon or The Blob, and then some of the not necessarily existential but a little more imaginative like Forbidden Planet, something like Plan 9 from Outer Space. Yeah, they're not great. Not all of them are, cinematic masterpieces, but they're enjoyable, and it's something fun to kind of go back to because they might not be perfect, they might not be the best, but each of them do something different enough that kind of gets your attention and thinks wow, they were really starting to break some ground in this decade with some effects work they were doing, with how they presented the monsters, just a lot of the effects work, even the score for some of them, they're really, really interesting to me.
Oh, well, you actually are more well-versed in these kind of 50s science fiction films than you'd led me to believe, Nick. I think you'd underplayed your familiarity with with these films, hiding your light in a bushel. But in addition to that sort of list of attributes that you were saying, I think obviously they lay the groundwork in terms of the story ideas that we have come to see repeated again and again in films in the subsequent decades in the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s. And I always think it heightens your appreciation of a modern day film if you kind of have a kind of grounding in the history of the genre, and so you can understand how they're somebody might be subverting the form or tweaking it or kind of making a callback to ideas that were played out in a previous earlier film.
Oh, absolutely. And it's always fun watching the older films and then seeing something you're like, wait a minute, what do I know that from? And then to see it was a reference, the film made a reference to this older film I'm watching and I didn't even realize it. You know what I mean? So if I missed it, did somebody else miss it? I didn't know that this director or writer was inspired by that. Was it a moment in the choice? Was it supposed to be that way? And then it goes in a completely different direction too. Talking about Godzilla again, that initial score that comes kicking through. I mean, that was sampled years and years later by Pharoah Monk on the song Simon Says, and he turns a terrifying just monster of a score, for lack of a better word, and turns it into this really, really sick hip-hop beat. And it's kind of cool how those two worlds collide. So there's a lot of just fun and imagination that gets sprouted from this guy, kind of like you alluded to earlier. It's almost like they're planting little seeds in the 50s, and over the years they kind of take the stuff and harvest it. And sometimes it's better, you know what I mean? You look at some of the horror films in the 70s and 80s that are sci-fi films in the 70s and 80s that are harkening back, or remakes, and most of them are pretty well done. And then you have ones that are done in the mid-2000s, and maybe they're not as good as the original ones. You know what I mean?
Well, Nick, you have really whetted my appetite to talk about the 1951 version of The Day the Earth Stood Still. Unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about the 2008 version first. So I think it's time we got stuck into that. So let's listen to Jennifer Connelly try out her best chat-up line.
What were you before you were human?
It would only frighten you.
We're getting images of these spheres from all over the world.
Are you aware of an impending attack on the planet Earth?
Yes.
Why have you come to our planet?
Your planet.
I need to know what's happening.
If the human race dies, the Earth survives.
We can change.
The decision is made.
You could stop this if you wanted to.
The process has begun.
Oh, God.
When a mysterious sphere arrives from outer space and lands in Manhattan, a team of scientists is assembled to investigate the craft and its occupants, a strangely humanoid figure and a giant robot. Uncertainty surrounds the intentions of the extraterrestrial visitors. Government officials are convinced that they've come to destroy us, but one of the scientists, Helen Benson, comes to realise that their mission might not be one of conquest and that there could be a way to stop them. In the cast, we have Keanu Reeves, Jennifer Connelly, Kathy Bates, John Hamm, Jaden Smith, John Cleese, Robert Knepper, Carl Chandler, and the great James Hong. The film was directed by Scott Derrickson, who did Doctor Strange and a bunch of horror movies, including Sinister, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and The Black Phone. As I'm sure you're already aware, if you've been listening to the first few minutes of this podcast, this is a remake of the 1951 film of the same name. That version was directed by Robert Wise and has come to be regarded as a classic of the sci-fi genre. Opinion on this remake, though, is not as complimentary. While it made a healthy $233 million at the box office of its $80 million budget, critical reaction to the film was largely negative, with reviewers pointing to a lack of ideas and a flat performance from Keanu. As for the opinions of the great unwashed, this has an audience rating on IMDb of 5.5 and a user rating of 2.3 on Letterboxd. As already mentioned, for the purposes of this show, I got Nick to watch both versions of the film. So with all of that out of the way, Nick, what did you make of The Day the Earth Stood Still?
The 2008 version with Keanu Reeves and Jennifer Connelly is disappointing because you have such a great premise, and I've never seen so many lengths and attempts to make such a bland, uninteresting, and just, at times, ugly film. I mean, from the jump, it is overwhelmingly CGI to where you can tell there's like a tank and two people in the foreground, and those are the only real things in the room. Everything else is CGI, and it does not hold up from 2008. And it looks rough. It feels rough. I can understand the criticisms on Keanu's role. I kind of get it, though, because he is playing like an alien in a human body. Spoilers. But the rest of it, I'm just like, what are we doing, gang? Why does an hour and 44-minute film feel like it's 2 hours long? It's just boring. There's nothing exciting about it. Like, it's such a disappointment. I thought, okay, we're going to get somehow an improvement on the original. There's going to be some cooler effects. And I kind of understand why they changed a thing or two about it. But another part of me is like, there's nothing wrong with the original. Why not just, I'm not saying do the exact same thing because you don't want to end up like, what's his face doing a shot for shot remake of Psycho, but do something fun with it. Do something a little more imaginative. Go darker with it. Like just do something to get my attention. Everything just feels just bland and sterile.
Well, when you go to remake a film that is kind of regarded as a bit of a classic, as I think the original of this film is, I think you're immediately on a hiding to nothing. And, you know, your film is always going to suffer in comparison because if the first film's a classic, then kind of in some ways the only way is down. And certainly, I certainly think that this remake is an inferior version of the original. Just to be a bit of a contrarian and just to make this perhaps a more interesting discussion, I mean, I do think that this film makes some interesting choices in order to try and make this version of films like more relevant to present day audiences. I don't think they necessarily succeed. So I think the first film is essentially a kind of born out of World War II, the experience of all of that death and destruction. It's also a product of the new nuclear age and the fact that humanity has created this technology that could destroy the planet. And this version updates the film or tries to be more contemporary in terms of its message by actually playing off of the environment crisis and the fact that, you know, humanity may be destroying the world not through conflict and nuclear weapons, but through climate breakdown. And I think that's actually if you're going to update, if you're going to remake this film, that's actually a pretty good idea to have at the center of the film that you're making. Unfortunately, I just don't think it lands that film, and it because I don't know what you felt, but it basically bottled its environmental message. It kind of has that there in the background, but it doesn't really flesh it out. And the first film, I think polemic is maybe too strong a word, but it's really punchy in terms of its message. Whereas this film, it just feels like it's like holding back its cards, and it just like, well, that's not the film that we're doing here. Like, it needs to be in your face with its message.
Absolutely. And I do agree. I do like some of the choices they made. But I feel like and Day the Earth Stood Still, so I'll just say 51 and 08. With 51, their message is subtle, but it's throughout and it's consistent. But with 08, the message, when it shows up, is very ham-fisted and it punches you in the face. Like, instead of a spaceship, here comes this big floating orb. And, it just so happens to be blue and green, just like our planet. We happen to find out, there's animals inside. It's an ark. They're trying to save the planet. And then they kind of forget about it, and they do these little side stories. And then they come back, and they're like, you guys are killing the planet. You're killing Earth. We can't go back now. Like, you guys are the problem, and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, okay, so why can't we have a consistent message throughout? And why can't the little side stories also touch on the environmental side of things? They don't. They go back to the human element, which we already know the human element. The human element is no generation has ever truly cared about the environment. They've only cared about themselves. They've only cared about what benefits their companies, what helps their profits, right? So why care about the environment now? And I feel like that question should have been asked and discussed in the film. Maybe instead of having, like, you go to a professor played by John Cleese, maybe he's like an oil tycoon, and you have a discussion with him. And maybe that ends up being too ham-fisted too. But if you're going to have these side plots, if you're already making the change and going to talk about the environment, then kind of have it across the board. Don't just bring it back up when it's convenient or when you're trying to get the message home, because we often kind of forget about it. And then when they go back to it and they're like, the Earth is dying, you're like, oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot why he was here for a second.
Yeah, I completely agree, because as you say, in the 51 version, the message of the movie is woven throughout the entire film, whereas in this 08 version, there's a bit of it here, and then it completely goes out of the film for 25 minutes because it's descended into an extended chase movie. Then we have a little bit of message, and then it completely disappears again. And I mean, the film's not really beyond Keanu Reeves saying, you're destroying the planet. Like, nobody really says what that means, and nobody sort of articulates what we should be doing different, and it just feels a bit sort of tokenistic. I mean, it doesn't even, like, what is this? What is so bad? Like, this film doesn't even establish what is so bad on planet Earth at the present that has prompted Keanu to suddenly turn up here and issue this devastating warning to planet Earth. Like what is it that has just happened? Couldn't tell you. Couldn't answer that question.
No, it doesn't make sense, because even the trailers, right, and even some of the posters, it paints it as essentially a disaster film. But, this alien, this spaceship that's coming is the disaster. It's almost like War of the Worlds, but a little bit different, but with an environmental message to it. And then when that environmental message happens, you're like, oh, that's why they're coming to the planet? Okay, I get it. But it's not like it's going to make us change anything. It's not like there's a message where it's like, you know what? I am going to recycle more. I am going to work on composting. I am going to try to buy a hybrid vehicle or something like that. We don't get anything like that. At least with 51, there's a better understanding. There's a human element that makes sense in what they're talking about. And you're like, okay, I can kind of see this and I can understand it. But like you said, with The Day the Earth Stood Still, or with '08, there's some stuff that's happening and you're like, okay, I guess we have to do this. But even more to your point, there's no discussion of. It's not like Keanu will put his hand on Jennifer Connelly and show her everything that's going wrong. That would be a wildly different film where he's like, let me show you what you guys are doing wrong. And then here comes a PowerPoint presentation. That's not happening. You know what I mean? He's not pointing at Exxon Valdez. He's not pointing at BP. He's not pointing at all these different things that we're doing wrong. He's just like, you guys are doing it wrong, and all the other planets have sent me here to tell you that. Okay, so what are we doing wrong? You guys are killing the planet. Right, but how? You guys are killing the planet? All right, we get it. And it just doesn't land like it should or like it could. This film could be much, much better and wildly more successful, but I think it gets in its own way.
I completely agree that it could be more successful, because I actually think there's another good idea that is ultimately squandered in this film in terms of conveying its message. So I actually think that in this '08 version, you have another parent-child relationship, and in the 51 version, obviously, it's a mother who is a war widow. The kind of, dad died in World War II. They've got this young son who's growing up. She's got a young son who's growing up without a father. Whereas in the '08 version, again, you have that mother-child dynamic, but there's a little bit more intrigue set up there, because it's not her, it's her stepson and the child. What I liked about it, what I thought was the really interesting dynamic, was the child's actually like really gung ho for like, we got to get this alien, we got to kill him. And I just thought that was like an interesting dynamic to throw into the film, to have that conflict between Jennifer Connelly and Jaden Smith, but then also that conflict between Jaden Smith and Keanu, and to see their changing relationship within the film. I thought that was fundamentally a good idea. I just don't think it was very well executed in this film.
It wasn't, and they even go so far as to have a moment with Keanu and James Hong in that restaurant, and he's talking about the planet, and Hong's like, oh yeah, I've been here for like a long time, and he's like, I kind of don't want to leave though, I'd like it. And he doesn't really go into it. He doesn't talk about like, yeah, they're not doing great to the planet, but as a people, as a society, there's some good out there. And if Keanu was able to see like, okay, there's good between, Jennifer Connelly's character and Jaden Smith's character, but then he's trying to develop that good between Keanu and Jaden Smith, okay, then we have something. There's something that can be built and developed, and he can learn from and realize, oh, you know what? Earth's not so bad, or some kind of, dumb thing like that. And there's even a chance with John Cleese coming in the film to kind of push that further, even add to it. And I love Monty Python. I enjoy John Cleese and like Faulty Towers and other stuff that he's done. I'm not saying he can't do a dramatic role, but I think that it's a missed opportunity on the writing side of things because he's just so bland. He's just like, oh, cool. Like, oh, wow. Oh, neat. Man, I got so many questions. There's no excitement there. There's no energy there. And there's it falls flat.
Well, you've put your finger on like one of my big frustrations with this film, and it's really the key of this entire film is I don't understand why Keanu changes his mind about the fate of the human race. Like, he lands on this planet and, you know, we're a hopeless cause. We have to be exterminated. I don't understand why he changes that. What is it that Keanu, what changes Keanu's mind, or what are we meant to think changes Keanu's mind? I can't really put my finger on it. I don't really understand.
The only thing I can think of is if he's some kind of empath and he can feel energies or, you know, see emotions as colors and he likes certain colors more than others or something wild like that. But even then, it's not like that's further explored because he has this conversation with Hong that, honestly, you take it out of the movie, you're not even going to miss it, right? But there's nothing learned from it. He's just like, Hong's like, yeah, it's not so bad. And you're like, okay. And then when he goes to Cleese, there's obviously something that happens there, but we really don't know what happens there. And this isn't a film where they're kind of like dancing around and you have to figure out stuff for yourself. And, oh, there's some hidden clues over there. And, you know, the audience is going to put 1 and 1 together and make 5 and it's going to be crazy. That's just not happening. That's not what this film is. And I think they need to be they should have been a lot more blatant with what they were trying to do and really kind of push that human element side of it. Because later on in the film, when what is it? It's Keanu, Connolly, and Smith. They're kind of in this moment. Here comes a cop. Keanu kills this cop, but then brings him back to life, right? So then when we stumble across this graveyard, and it's got all these deceased war veterans and war people, he's like, hey, do this. Can you do this for my dad? And Keanu's like, that's not how that works. And then there's like this massive breakdown thing. It's like, okay, so when did that become his motivation? When did that become Jaden Smith's motivation? Because before that, he's calling the authorities and being like, hey, I know where he is. And he's ratting him out. He's putting his, Jennifer Connelly's character in danger. He's endangering the whole thing and making it a lot worse for humanity. But then he sees this opportunity and he's like, oh, I can do something that's going to benefit me. And part of me is like, hey, what's more American than that, right? So really, they're not too far off. But at the same time, it's just, they don't really stick with one kind of feeling or one kind of thing that helps them grow and show that emotion and show that, like, hey, humanity has its flaws, but there's more good outweighing the bad.
And because I don't understand, like, I get what the points that you're making about, that scene with the cop and they go to the graveyard. And I guess the idea there is that Keanu sees, humans' capacity for love. But I don't understand why that then means he trusts us not to destroy the planet, because we've clearly had this capacity for love for centuries, and we're still crapping all over the earth.
Yeah, absolutely. He's met and immediately is shot. He speaks to different, right? He speaks to different people and different levels of government organizations. They all treat him horribly. When he hitches a ride in a pickup truck with Jaden Smith to this location, and the people in the truck are like, all right, see you later, the world's going to end, woo! And off they drive. There's no humanity or compassion there. I can understand if there's a thing of like, hey, thanks for helping us get here. No, thank you. Spread love. You got to help one another even in dire times. There could have been a moment there that kind of added to, but instead it's like, well, here's two hillbillies somehow in New York, and they're just trying to, party it up. But somehow, some way, they still pick up these two random people hitchhiking. Like, it doesn't add up for me.
I feel your frustration, Nick. I feel your frustration. But let's talk a little bit about Keanu Reeves in this film. I mean, he plays Klaatu as this cold, otherworldly figure who some see as some see that as a kind of fitting representation of an alien visitor from another world, whereas other people have commented that the performance, it just comes across as too detached. I mean, what did you make of Reeves's portrayal here, and how do you think that factors into how we ultimately see Klaatu's motivations in this film? I mean, did that kind of stoic, emotionless style enhance or detract from this film's message for you?
For me, I was okay with his performance. You could say I liked it, but it wasn't anything. It's not like I'm leaving this going, oh man, Keanu Reeves is it. Like, he is just crushing it. He's firing on all cylinders here. No, that's obviously not the case. But it also, at times, kind of feels like stock Keanu, because we have this guy in The Matrix, right? He's just like, wow, and then just kind of quiet because he's an unassuming guy who's thrust into an extraordinary situation. He doesn't know what to make of it. Same thing with John Wick. He's this quiet guy. We don't know what to make of him. Then he's thrust into this extraordinary situation, and rather than be overwhelmed by it, he just immediately starts killing people left and right. And we get glimpses of that in this film, especially during the interrogation scene. He's all wired up and stuff, and he's saying things to him, and it's like, okay, it could have been a little more intense had maybe it was filmed better, or the score was better, or the writing was better. But instead, he comes across as this, like, almost smarmy and saying, like, oh, well, this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, all right, I'm not really scared of you, dude. It just feels like Keanu's talking to me. I don't really feel like this is Klaatu from another planet. So there's times when it works and times when it doesn't work. There's almost time where he feels like a Terminator. And I'm going to touch on that later when we get to the actual explosions part. But there's just this, at times, weirdly lifelessness. Not like reserved, but truly a lifelessness. And it's like, that's not doing it for me, Keanu. You got to tweak something in there.
I completely agree. And I think you've actually hit the nail on the head again when you say it's lifelessness rather than reserve. I mean, I don't think there is anything wrong with, like, Keanu's choice here to play this character in a very pared down, very restrained way, because that is essentially how Michael Rennie plays the character in the 51 version. But it's all to do with the execution. And like, I don't know what you thought. I thought Michael Rennie was fantastic in that 51 version. I mean, he's very contained, he's very restrained. He always feels like he's the master of every situation that he's in, even when he's just this one guy, with facing up to the might of the entire sort of United States, and he's kind of responding to that situation in a very controlled, contained way. But there's often sort of like a little bit of wry amusement in his performance. And I think one of the strongest elements of that 51 version, which there's nothing comparable to it in the 08 version, is the relationship between, like, Michael Rennie and that little kid. And some of the strongest bits in the movies is where that kid's sort of taking him around New York, showing him the city. And Michael Rennie kind of just was able to, despite giving a very restrained performance, was able to give it so much more personality than what Keanu sort of ended up doing in this 08 version.
Absolutely agree with you. I think Michael Rennie was fantastic in that role. And what helps is, and again, it's a random one-off line where they're talking to his character, and they're like, how do you speak English? How do you do this? And he's like, oh, we've been monitoring your radio waves for like years and years and years now. So this is a guy that's clearly done his homework. He knows he's the smartest guy in the room, and even shows it when he's writing on the chalkboard with all the formulas and everything. But when he meets Bobby and when he's hanging out with Bobby, he's not used to kids. He's used to adults going back and forth, and he understands adults and how they work and, secret motives and things like that. But when you have this kid like Bobby, who is, gullible's not the word, but a very, very innocent child, there's this childlike wonder of, like, exploration and, oh, we can do this, oh, we can do that. Like, it's not deadlines, you're not on a schedule or a timeline. He's just like, yeah, let's go do this. And then he's showing him around and all these different things. And I think that's where the humanity starts coming out, right? Because the whole point of 51 It's a parable for, like you said earlier, nuclear war, and let's dial back the aggression and the intensity, and let's go for peace and not war. But if he knows only war and destruction, to see this kid who's just this excitable young kid that's just hungry for information and wants to show him like all the cool stuff in the world, then that's where that seed's planted of like, oh, humanity's not that bad because the next generation's going to be better. We don't get that in the remake. Instead, we have this kid who's angry at the world because conflict and destruction has taken away his father, and he's lashing out at everything and everyone because he has this misplaced anger. He doesn't know where it's going to go. And so Keanu's like, all right, I get this kid, but here's Jennifer Connelly being like, no, he's better than that. Like, he can change and all this other stuff, but they don't show how. There's not enough extended interaction with Keanu and Jaden Smith's character, and even when there is, it's one note the entire time. It's the same bit over and over and over. There's no growth. There's no development. It's just like, what are we doing?
Well, Jaden Smith is, I'm just going to say, is awful in this film.
He's not great.
It's a horrendous performance, and it's from this ridiculous period in human history where Will Smith or Hollywood was basically trying to make Jaden Smith a thing. Mercifully, we seem to have got past that phase of human development, such as Jaden Smith's behavior in this film. You sort of like, you're just thinking, you're just like, oh my God, Keanu is just going to click his fingers and just like, okay, that's it. Wipe him out.
Pretty much. And it's weird, if you look at Jaden Smith's career, the stuff that he's most known for are either films he was in with his dad or remakes that didn't quite land because they didn't capture the same humanity as the original source material. And even when he put out his music, like there's an interview somewhere, I can't remember, he's talking to somebody and they're like, do you have a new album coming out? And he's like, well, I showed it to a couple guys and they told me it was horrible, never released it, so I'm working on something new. And that something new has never really come out. So I don't know if other people are finally telling him like, hey man, maybe not. Like maybe go do anything else, or just wait to inherit, the wealth that's going to be coming your way from other members of your family, something. But this isn't for him. This isn't doing it for me. I don't know who did a favor for who in this. I don't know, and I'm genuinely confused on why him. Like, what stood out in the audition? What was he trying to capture? Was it they saw him like he could be super emotional and hit those peaks of like sadness and anger wrapped together? Even though he can hit them, if there's nothing really behind it, if the dialogue isn't there to really kind of send it home, then what are we doing? You know what I mean? We're throwing softballs in a major league game and still striking out.
It's nepotism, baby. It's nepotism. Pure and simple. Pure and simple. Okay, I think it's time to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
Far into the next century, the Earth's prognosis is hopeless.
Folks, we got it bright.
Lock out those windows!
Its population, helpless.
They killed everyone.
Here, a man desperate for revenge.
Harry M. Stark, an outland, bounty hunting, garbage collector.
He served papers on my family. I'm gonna kill him.
And a woman praying for freedom.
She tortured her parents. Nobody's perfect.
Join 7 travelers on a daring journey.
The Skins own the Outland. They want everything that passes through it. Your only chance is if we stick together.
A journey of hope.
Things can get worse than they are now.
Things could be a lot worse.
A journey of no return.
We stay off the main road and push on for Neon City.
Come on, one more time. Take me home. Come on.
Vanity, Lyle Alzado, and Michael Ironside. Neon City.
We're back, and now we're looking at the exploding helicopter action. This occurs towards the end of the film when government forces are hunting for Keanu, Jennifer Connelly and Jaden Smith. After their location becomes known, the trio flee into some woods to avoid the 3 helicopters that are coming to capture them. Utilizing his telekinetic powers, Keanu overtakes the controls of two choppers and forces them to crash into each other, whereupon they then fall to the ground and explode. Nick, what did you make of the exploding helicopter action?
It was disappointing.
Like so much else in this film.
I wasn't sure when we were going to get a helicopter explosion. I thought maybe towards the beginning when the ship or sphere is first landing, or later on. But then I see three coming in the woods. I'm like, here we go. One of them grabs Jennifer Connelly and leaves. I'm like, all right, at least one of these other two is going to get it. And I'm figuring out, like, maybe he'll throw a tree or he'll do something crazy. They'll run into a building or a cliff or something. But when all of a sudden he's able to get the lasers locked onto his hands and, like you said, do some kind of telekinetic thing where the systems go haywire, I'm like, okay, what are we going to do with this? You just get shaky cam. The collision's kind of neat, don't get me wrong, because we don't see that a whole lot. And it's nice to see a little bit more of a realistic collision where they kind of hit each other. They're falling apart as they fall, and then we get an explosion. It's not like they crash and there's an immediate explosion, you know? But when the explosion happens, they cheapen out on us. Because there's an explosion that begins, we cut to Jaden Smith for who knows what reason, and then we go back to Keanu, who is standing there like a Terminator. Big explosion behind him, which is half covered by a tree, and it's like, you're trying to play it cool, but it comes off kind of douchey. And then you just do this Terminator walk straight towards him. Jaden Smith's running away, freaking out, like, don't hurt me, don't hurt me. He's clearly not going to hurt him. And then he, like, slips on some kind of bridge and Keanu saves him and whatever. But how do you go from this, like, lifeless person and then even more lifeless, robotic, if you will, again, like a Terminator, while this explosion's happening? It's disappointing. And I wanted more. Yeah, the explosion's neat looking, but you cover it with a tree. You don't even give me the full explosion. I want to see beginning to end fireball. Don't cut it out. I'm an adult. I'm a grown man. I want to see the full explosion. My feelings are not being hurt. They're being hurt when I don't get the full explosion.
Well, obviously, I have a lot of sympathy with your view of the exploding helicopter action here, because perhaps my view is coloured by the fact that, for over 15 years I've been documenting films with helicopter explosions, so I like looking at them. I'm not, I can't lie, but I thought the explosion in this film is just too brief. It's just too brief. It's like
that too.
It needs to be like a couple of seconds longer. We don't need to labour the point, but it just needs to be a little bit longer. And I also completely agree with what you were saying. It's like, why does that camera cut to Jaden Smith? It just is like we're watching the helicopters explode. We don't need that shot there. Like, it's not communicating any message about Jaden Smith at that moment. It's not communicating any moment as to, like, we need to understand what Jaden Smith thinks about seeing these helicopters explode in front of him. Like, it's just a very jarring cut. What is that cut doing there? It's really, really irritating. It's really irritating.
Because it's not like they cut to him and he's, like, screaming or freaking out. None of that stuff. He's just like, oh no.
Yeah, it's not like there was somebody on board that helicopter that was a close friend of his and we need to sort of understand, like, his reaction at that moment. It's just like, what are we doing here? Like, with this, it is a bizarre choice. Now, I mean, so a disappointing exploding helicopter. I did want to talk to you about one other element of this particular sequence. There's a moment that happens just before the exploding helicopter section, which is another helicopter. There's obviously, as I mentioned in the description, there's three of them. One of them crops up and kidnaps Jennifer Connelly by having one of the soldiers seemingly bungee jump from the helicopter down to the ground. They grab Jennifer Connelly and then they bounce back up to the helicopter. I've never seen that before in a film. I felt it was quite cool. I kind of feel like we need to see more of that.
Well, we did technically a few episodes ago when we talked about Carter, because they're rappelling out of helicopters and they're looking really cool doing it. This one, because it's so overblown CGI nonsense, it looks cheap. And I'm like, what are we doing this for? Give me 3 exploding helicopters. Like, maybe she runs into a tree branch and knocks herself out cold or something, and then he gets mad at the helicopters, blows them up. That I can maybe kind of buy. But don't do this like, oh no, they got me. Oh no, like don't. It was dumb.
It was deeply silly, but I kind of enjoyed the silliness of it, because it's sort of like, okay, the mechanics of the plot require us to have Jennifer Connelly separated from Keanu and Jaden at this particular point. How are we going to achieve this? We've written ourselves into a corner. Why don't we have somebody bungee jump? I know. Why don't we have someone bungee jump from the helicopter down to the ground and grab her, and then we can kind of, put her in with the generals and bigwigs for the final act.
Just ridiculous. And it's like, and then it's not like anything happens with her. They're just like walking around and she's like, let me talk to him, I can make it better. Let me talk to him, I can save him. Let me talk. It's like, we get it.
Okay, I think that just about wraps things up for this show. Nick, thanks once again for joining me. In the unlikely event that there's anyone listening who wants to hear more of your podcasting, what should they do?
They should head over to rabbitholepodcasts.com. You can find me play MST for me, as well as Lyrical Innuendo, shows that are discussing television and music. If you want to have more of a film-based conversation, I pop up every so often over on Movies, Films, and Flicks. But most importantly, you can listen to previous episodes of this show, because I've been on 1 or 2 times and have talked about a lot of really great movies, a couple duds, but just a fun, expansive knowledge of exploding helicopters has been gifted to me by Will over and over again. So do yourself a favor and check those previous episodes out.
As always, don't forget to check out the Exploding Helicopter website at explodinghelicopter.com for more reviews and information about films where helicopters explode. If you want to follow us online, we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Letterboxd, and YouTube. If you can help spread the word about what we do by rating, reviewing, or retweeting us, we'd be very grateful. We'll be back soon. But until then, what should people do, Nick?
Keep watching the skies for those exploding helicopters. This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
I'm going to ask you a series of control questions. Are you currently in a seated position?
Yes.
Are you human?
My body